Someone get the truck driver a coffee while the adults finish talking. That's what he said, not quietly, not off to the side. He said it into a live mic, clear, deliberate, and timed perfectly for the room, and the cameras, 3 of them, mounted high in the corners of the boardroom, streaming the entire leadership transition of Blackridge Industrial Group to investors, legal archives, and anyone with access to the internal feed that morning. My hand was still extended when he said it. I had stepped forward to greet the incoming CEO polished table. Glass walls overlooking downtown Chicago. The kind of room designed to project control. I was holding a bouquet in my left hand, white lilies and eucalyptus, ordered under my name at their request for presentation optics. He didn't look at my face first. He looked at my boots. Then the flowers. Then made his decision. 2 seconds. That's all it took. My name is Thalia Ward. I'm 52 years old, managing partner at Northcrest Capital, a private investment firm that doesn't show up for meetings like this unless the numbers matter. And the numbers that morning, $2.1 billion in committed capital. What I'm about to tell you is how one sentence, just 11 words spoken into a hot mic in a Chicago boardroom, ended up costing a chairman his job, his reputation, and every dollar of that commitment before lunch. Before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. I'd also love to know where you're listening from and what the temperature is like there right now. Just a quick note, this story is fictional, with some elements enhanced using AI to make it more vivid and engaging. Now, you need to understand why I was in that room at all. Blackridge had been on our radar for nearly a year. Mid-sized industrial conglomerate. Logistics, manufacturing, distribution, solid infrastructure on paper. The kind of company that should have been quietly profitable. Instead, it was bleeding, bad acquisitions, poor integration, leadership that treated expansion like a headline strategy instead of an operational reality. By the time they came to us, they didn't just need capital, they needed correction, and we were prepared to give them both. They just didn't realize who they were talking to. At Northcrest Capital, my role isn't ceremonial. I don't attend meetings to observe or nod at presentations. I sign, I approve, and when necessary, I walk away. As managing partner, I hold final authority over capital deployment, especially in deals where our position carries structural weight. This one did. The $2.1 billion commitment wasn't just another line in a funding package, it was the foundation the entire transaction depended on. We were the lead investor, the anchor tranche. Without our participation, the rest of the capital stack wouldn't hold. Several institutional partners had already made it clear they would only proceed if we did. That morning, I wasn't there as a guest. 2 years before Blackridge, I made a decision that stayed with me longer than any profit ever could. It was a $600 million investment into a regional infrastructure firm. Strong numbers, clean projections, a chairman with a reputation that checked every box on paper. I didn't attend the final meeting. I delegated it to my second-in-command, signed off remotely, and trusted the process. 3 days before closing, a video surfaced. It wasn't leaked quietly. It spread fast, shared internally first, then picked up externally within hours. The chairman stood on a stage during a company town hall, pointing at a line worker in the front row. He called him replaceable. Then he laughed. Not nervous laughter, not misjudged humor. The kind of laugh that assumes the room belongs to you. Some people in the audience laughed with him. We saw the clip. We discussed it. Legal said it wasn't material to the deal. PR said it would pass. The board issued a statement about context and misinterpretation, and I let the deal go through. What followed wasn't immediate collapse. It was slower than that, and in some ways, worse. Regulatory scrutiny increased. Labor disputes escalated. Internal morale dropped in ways no spreadsheet could capture. And every time our firm's name was mentioned, it was tied to a company that treated people like expendable parts. We made our return eventually, but it cost time, attention, and something less measurable credibility. After that, I changed how I operated. I stopped believing that numbers alone could tell the full story of a company. I started paying attention to tone, to behavior, to the small moments most people ignore, and I added something to every deal going forward. We called it the respect clause. It wasn't complicated. If any senior leadership engaged in behavior during negotiations or closing that could damage the company's reputation, documented. Observable behavior, we reserved the right to withdraw our capital immediately. No penalties, no delays. Most people signed it without concern. They never think it applies to them. The morning of the meeting, I flew into Chicago earlier than necessary, not because of scheduling, but because I don't like arriving rushed into rooms where decisions carry weight. I changed in the airport lounge, traded the tailored suit I'd worn on the flight for something more practical, and took a car downtown to Blackridge's headquarters. Glass tower, polished lobby, a stock ticker scrolling quietly along the wall. The kind of place designed to signal stability, even when the numbers underneath say otherwise. At reception, I gave my name. The woman behind the desk smiled, then hesitated just a fraction too long before typing it in. It was subtle, but I've learned to notice those pauses. They usually mean something doesn't match expectations. A few minutes later, someone from investor relations came down to escort me. Young, composed, rehearsed in the way people are when they've been told this meeting matters. He asked about my flight. I asked about the room upstairs. He said people were optimistic. The elevator ride was quiet. When the doors opened, the atmosphere changed. Softer carpet, lower voices, walls lined with framed photos of past leadership moments, ribbon cuttings, expansion announcements, handshakes frozen in time. We stopped outside a set of glass doors. Above them, cameras were already mounted, red indicator lights still off for the moment. "Full transparency today," he said, almost as if it were reassurance. Inside, the boardroom looked exactly as expected. Long table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, screens preloaded with presentation decks. On a side table, a floral arrangement, white lilies, eucalyptus, the one ordered under my name. He handed it to me when I pointed it out. They thought it would help the tone. He said quietly, I carried it in myself. Most people were already seated. Conversations paused just long enough to acknowledge someone entering. Then resumed. No one stood. No one asked who I was. That was fine. I wasn't there to be introduced. I took a few steps into the room, still holding the flowers, and felt the shift almost immediately, not in words, but in posture. The way people glanced at me, then past me, the way their attention returned to conversations that didn't include me. No nameplate waited at the table. No one paused to ask who I was. They saw what they expected to see. Work boots instead of heels. No visible badge of hierarchy. A woman carrying flowers into a room already arranged for optics. In their world, that combination meant one thing. Support staff. I've been in enough rooms like this to recognize the pattern. It happens quickly. People sort you before you speak. They decide your level, your relevance, your place in the room, all based on fragments. And once they decide, they rarely revisit it. At the head of the table sat Victor Langford, chairman of Blackridge, early 60s, composed, the kind of presence built from years of being listened to, without interruption. He noticed the flowers before he noticed me. Set those over there? He said, gesturing toward the sideboard without breaking his conversation. I didn't move right away. I'll hold on to them, I replied calmly. He gave me a brief look, then the kind reserved for people who don't immediately follow instructions. Not angry, just dismissive. Then he turned back to the discussion, as if the moment had already been resolved. Around the table, no one corrected the assumption. No one said my name. No one thought to. I walked along the edge of the table, taking in faces, noticing who avoided eye contact and who didn't bother to look at all. At the far side sat the incoming CEO, Daniel Reeves, flipping through a printed agenda like it might offer him a place to focus. I stopped near him, set the flowers down within reach, and freed my hand. Then I extended it. "Welcome to Black Ridge," I said, my hand still extended toward Daniel. "I'm Thalia." He looked up, just barely. His eyes flicked from my hand to my face, then past me toward the head of the table, before he could respond. Victor Langford shifted in his chair. It wasn't a large movement, just enough to redirect attention. He leaned slightly toward the lapel microphone clipped to his jacket, the one feeding audio into the live stream, and then he smiled. Not at me. At the room. "Someone get the truck driver a coffee," he said, voice steady, perfectly projected. While the adults finished talking, the words landed exactly how he intended them to. Clear, public, final. There was a beat less than a second where the room decided how to react. A director near his right laughed first, too quickly, the kind of laugh that comes from instinct, not humor. Another followed, softer, more uncertain. Across the table, someone coughed to cover their reaction. One of the communication staff lowered his gaze immediately, already understanding what that sentence would sound like outside this room. The cameras were still rolling. I didn't pull my hand back right away. I let it remain there, suspended between us. Long enough for the silence underneath the laughter to settle. Long enough for anyone who wanted to step in to correct it, to redirect it to have the opportunity. No one did. Daniel glanced down at his papers, suddenly very focused on something that wasn't happening in front of him. He didn't move his hand, didn't acknowledge mine. That told me everything I needed to know. Victor's eyes finally met mine, measuring, checking whether I understood what he had just established, whether I would accept it. I lowered my hand on my own terms. No rush, no reaction, just a small, deliberate motion, like closing a door. Then I picked up the flowers, walked past the empty seats, and took the one at the far end of the table. No nameplate there either. That was fine. It suited the role they had already assigned me. Around the room, conversations tried to resume, voices lifted, then settled again, slightly tighter than before. Someone adjusted papers, someone else reached for water they didn't drink. Victor turned back to the front of the room, as if nothing of consequence had just happened. "Let's begin," he said. And just like that, the meeting moved forward, as if the ground hadn't already shifted. "Now I want to hear from you. If you think Victor Langford was right to put someone in their place like that, go ahead and comment agree. But if you believe that moment crossed a line that arrogance has consequences, then write arrogant. I'm genuinely curious where you stand. Because sometimes a single sentence reveals more about a person than years of success ever could." The first slide appeared on the screen title. Transition plan. Projected timelines. Victor spoke with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times. Voice smooth. Confident. Already moving the room forward as if nothing had disrupted the flow. I let him get through the opening lines. Then I spoke. "Before you continue," I said, not raising my voice, just placing it where it couldn't be ignored. "There's something this room needs to be clear about." The words cut cleanly across the table. Conversations stopped without being told to. Victor turned, irritation flickering for a fraction of a second, before settling into something more controlled. "We're not taking input from staff during the session," he replied, the edge of a smile still there. "If you have something, leave it with investor relations afterward." I met his gaze. "If you're not willing to acknowledge the person sitting across from you," I said, "then by tomorrow morning, $2.1 billion will no longer be part of this deal." Silence followed, but not the kind that comes with confusion, the kind that comes with calculation. Someone shifted in their chair. A pen stopped mid-note. Eyes moved not toward me, but toward Victor, waiting for him to reassert control. A director let out a short laugh. Too loud. Too forced. "Let's keep things professional," he said, as if labeling the moment would contain it. Victor leaned back slightly, studying me now with more attention than before. "That's quite a statement," he said. "Capital is already secured. I am the capital," I replied. The words didn't echo, They settled. Across the table, the CFO straightened, his expression tightening as something in his mind aligned with what I had just said. The room was starting to understand, not all at once, but enough. Victor's expression didn't change much, but his certainty did, and for the first time since I walked into that room, he wasn't entirely sure where I stood. For a moment, no one spoke, not because they didn't have questions, but because the room was busy rearranging itself around a new reality. The CFO was the first to break the silence. "We'll need direct confirmation from the capital provider," he said carefully, choosing each word with precision. "Legal documentation alone won't suffice. It requires authorized release." Victor's eyes shifted back to me. "Slower this time. You're saying you control the funds," he asked. Not dismissive anymore, not amused, just verifying. "I'm the managing partner of Northcrest Capital," I said. "Authorized to release the full commitment." "How much?" someone asked from midway down the table, as if the number might have changed. "All of it," I answered. The words settled differently now. The lead independent director leaned forward, flipping open the folder in front of him. Pages turned, eyes scanned. The clause was there, clear, direct, unmistakable. Reputational conduct. Immediate withdrawal rights. No penalty. "I remember this," he said quietly. "It was revised during the second negotiation round. At my request," I said. Victor exhaled, a short breath that didn't quite hide the shift in his posture. "You were concerned about optics," he said, trying to place the logic back into something manageable. "I was concerned about behavior," I replied. That landed harder than anything else so far. Across the room, attention moved not toward the screens anymore, but toward each other, toward risk, toward implication. The incoming CEO finally looked up, really looked this time, his expression no longer distant. "What qualifies as documented conduct?" he asked. The director didn't hesitate. "Impact, not intent," he said, reading directly. "If the behavior can materially affect reputation, and it's recorded or witnessed, the clause applies." A quiet realization moved through the room. The cameras were still on, and suddenly, everyone understood exactly what had already been captured. The meeting didn't collapse right away. That's not how rooms like this work. People continue. They move forward out of habit, out of denial, out of the quiet hope that if they keep talking, the consequences won't fully arrive. Victor straightened, adjusted his jacket, and turned back to the screen. "Let's proceed," he said, voice controlled again. "We can address any concerns after the presentation." Slides advanced, forecasts appeared, revenue curves, operational restructuring timelines, projected recovery points, all built on a foundation that was already unstable. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. About 10 minutes later, the CFO cleared his throat. Not loudly, just enough to interrupt the rhythm that Victor was trying to reestablish. "There is one item we need to formally acknowledge before capital release," he said, fingers resting on the document in front of him. Victor didn't look at him. "We've covered everything. The conduct provision," the CFO continued. That got attention. Pages turned again, chairs shifted. The independent director leaned in, scanning the clause more carefully this time. The language was exact, no ambiguity, no room to negotiate once triggered. Victor's patience thinned. "This is standard language," he said. "It's not relevant here. It becomes relevant if the threshold is met." The director replied. "And who decides that?" Victor asked. "I do," I said. He turned to me fully now, no trace of dismissal left. "You're suggesting this meeting meets that threshold. I'm stating that the condition has already been met," I answered. There was a pause. Then the room began to fracture, not visibly, but internally. Phones appeared under the table. Messages sent quietly. Legal teams contacted without announcement. The kind of silent coordination that happens when people realize the outcome is no longer theoretical. Victor stood. "We'll take a short recess," he said, voice firm enough to imply control. Chairs moved quickly this time. People stepped out in clusters, speaking in low tones, already recalculating positions. I stayed seated for a moment. Then I stood, stepped into the hallway, and pulled out my phone. One call. That was all it took. Reed picked up on the second ring. Execute the withdrawal, I said. Full amount, effective immediately. A brief pause, not doubt confirmation. All of it, he asked. All of it, I replied. Reason code, conduct during negotiations. Documentation is live. Understood. The line went dead. I stood there in the hallway for a moment, steady, composed. Not because it was easy, but because it was already decided long before I made the call. When I walked back into the boardroom, everything looked the same on the surface. Same polished table, same projections glowing on the screen, same people pretending the structure still held. Victor glanced at me, forcing calm back into his expression. Let's continue, he said. The presentation resumed. But the foundation was gone. The first phone buzzed, then another, then a cascade notifications, lighting up across the table like a silent alarm no one could ignore. The CFO checked his screen, then froze. The lead tranche, he said slowly, voice flattening. It's been withdrawn. The room didn't erupt. It tightened. Withdrawn, how Victor asked, his tone sharper now. Executed. The CFO replied. Confirmed. Full amount. 2.1 billion. That's when the shift became visible. One director leaned back, staring at nothing. Another was already typing rapidly, likely contacting legal. Someone else stood up halfway, then sat back down, unsure what action even mattered anymore. Victor turned to me. All performance gone. You'll reverse this, he said, quieter now, but heavier. I held his gaze. There's nothing to reverse. This time, no one tried to interrupt, because they understood. Within minutes, the board moved not emotionally, but procedurally. Emergency session. Governance clauses invoked. Legal language replacing confidence. Motions raised, seconded, passed. Victor Langford was no longer in control of the room. Within the hour, he was placed on immediate administrative leave pending internal investigation. His authority stripped in real time, right there in the same room where he had chosen to perform. Around him, the leadership team unraveled. Not loudly, but unmistakably. Calls overlapped. Voices dropped into urgent whispers. The incoming CEO sat in silence, staring at a deal that no longer existed. The board wasn't discussing growth anymore. They were discussing damage control. Because the truth was simple. Blackridge hadn't just lost funding. They had lost their lifeline. The $2.1 billion wasn't optional capital, it was survival. Without it, restructuring stalled. Partners hesitated. And the market would react before the day was over. Opportunity doesn't wait for recovery. It moves on. I stood, adjusted my coat, and walked out without needing acknowledgement. No one stopped me by the time I reached the elevator. The outcome was already sealed, not by contracts, by a moment, as the doors closed. I thought about how quickly things shift when respect is treated like an afterthought. And as I left the building, there was only one thing left worth saying. Respect isn't something you offer after the deal is done. It's the price of entry to the conversation. If you would have made the same choice I did, walking away and pulling the entire $2.1 billion after that moment, right, yes, so I know I wasn't alone in that decision. If you would have stayed, ignored the insult, and protected the deal instead, then be honest and right, stay. And if you're still thinking it through, weighing respect against opportunity, just right time. There's no right answer for everyone, but your answer says a lot about what you value when it truly matters. I walked away from $2.1 billion, not because I could afford to lose it, but because I couldn't afford to ignore what it revealed. In that room, I was reminded that respect isn't a gesture, it's a standard. The way people treat others when they think it doesn't matter, that's who they really are. And I've learned that no deal, no opportunity, no number is worth compromising that truth. If this story meant something to you, then you're someone who understands value beyond money. Be part of this community, share your thoughts, like the video, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories that actually matter.